were any samurai swords made out of Wootz?
This video is sponsored by the House of Atlas and their brand new razors available now.
A while ago, the House of Atlas, a razor company, has contacted us asking us to make a katana from their razor blades. It's not often that we have a sponsor that allows us to do the research to bring such a cool topic to you, which gave us a great opportunity to talk about one of the coolest topics in Japanese sword making, and that is samurai swords made from Western steel. In our part of the world, the following topic is not very well researched, and that is samurai swords made out of Western steel. Keep in mind, Japan is the easternmost country, so everything west of it is west. However, for a brief period of time, from allegedly 1550, really more like 1600, to the 1700s, some samurai swords were made from what is known as Nanban Tetsu, or Western barbarian steel. What is Western barbarian steel? What are its properties? Is going to be the subject of today's conversation. Around the time of the arrival of the Dutch to Japan, 1600, it became popular to use a exotic material that the Westerners brought into Japan to make all kinds of trinkets, including swords. The material was called Namban Tetsu, or barbarian iron. Now, that material came from various sources and in various shapes. The shapes are important. Some of the material is undoubtedly of European origin. However, considering the trade route and what we know from the chemical composition of the ingots, a lot of it came from India, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, even Korea. Altogether, it is unfair to think of Japanese steelmaking industry to be of Japanese origin. After all, the earliest Japanese swords were of Chinese design, and it is said that Chinese steelmakers were imported into Japan to teach the Japanese how to efficiently create all the necessary materials. So at that time, that material was not called Namban Tetsu. However, it's something to think of. Now, around the 1600s, various ingots were imported into Japan and are classified by their shape. Here are the names of the shapes, and from a research paper that I dug up, each shape has a specific chemical composition, ranging from high carbon, high sulfur, high phosphorus, to high carbon, low sulfur, low phosphorus. This is important. Please keep this table in mind. Nambantetsu ingots were delivered in multiple shapes. Some were round, some were rectangular. This weird shape is the only shape that we could find online to show to you. However, that is pretty cool because it shows that the material is forgeable. It has flattening, it has material isolation, and it has that pointy drawing function. So when you buy this, you know it's very well forgeable. If we refer to an earlier presentation I did about Wootz steel, what we know about Wootz steel is that as a statistical average, it tends to be high carbon, high phosphorus, high sulfur. What we know about the trading patterns in the region, we know that India, Sri Lanka, and Malaysia are closer to Japan and are on Western trading routes towards that country than, let's say, Sweden or Norwegians. So considering the Western imperialist trading routes and the international economy of the time, it is more likely that some of the Indian Wootz material would have been picked up and dropped off at the shores of Japan. We don't need to speculate because the chemical table I brought up earlier seems to confirm that, in that it is consistent with the chemical composition of Middle Eastern sword blades. Specifically, we're talking about contaminating materials like phosphorus, sulfur. And if further analysis is conducted, I'm quite certain that other trace materials will act like fingerprints in our little crime scene. A well-known author, Sakakibara Kozan, refers to the actual properties of the ingots upon manufacturing fairly poorly. He says that they are too brittle to make armor or swords. Now, if you work with the material enough and you work with crucible steel or bloomery steel, and I'm generally referring to mahogany to be a type of bloomery steel, and I'm referring Wootz to be a type of crucible steel, you know that at early stages of manufacturing, those materials process differently and sometimes are allergic to technique of the opposing party. For example, it is ill-advised to take a Wootz puck, stretch it out, and start folding it at a super hot temperature. It will simply collapse as if it's cast iron. And that seems to be the problem that the Japanese should have encountered. Other thing, that is the problem that I encountered working with Wootz. So, because the Japanese manufacturing tradition is completely built on working with bloomery steel, they started working the Wootz pucks the same way they tried bloomery steel. So it is not a mistake on them, because at the time we don't have the theory of carbon, we don't have the periodic table of elements, all we have is the material in our hands, and if it's heavy, solid enough, you try to work it. That is something that explains away the poor reviews of the material. However, at the same time, when you're working with steels, the phosphorus levels are really, really important for forge welding. The paper I referred to earlier specifically addresses that issue apropos the Japanese sword, since it's published by the Institute of the Study of the Japanese Sword. And ultimately, it concludes that high-level phosphorus and silver ingots are worse for forge welding and making swords, but the lower phosphorus and high carbon ingots were very good. Because the only way in period ingots were categorized were by shape. And that's pretty good. It is good because different manufacturing locations would have consolidated their material or poured them into their respective locally idiosyncratic shape. And we have a whole list. So the shape of the ingot is a proxy for where it came from, and therefore a proxy for its chemical composition, and that seems to be borne out in evidence. Once again, refer to the table I mentioned earlier. However, other sources from the period say that Namban Tetsu is perfectly fine for swords and actually makes great swords. Here we have to be careful. Some of that could be because the big pool of Western ingots is this big, so one author is talking about this fish and the other author is talking about another fish, not really explaining that there's all kinds of variation. What we know about Western steel of the time, and I'm going to refer to Michelangelo, for example, who would order Swedish steel specifically for his chisels so he can carve marble. If it's good for Michelangelo, it's good for Sakamoto. Now, given the explained idiosyncrasies of Japanese sword-making tradition, where everyone's taught this is how you make a sword, this is what our school does, we fold a certain amount of times, we select only certain type of colors into mahogany, this is how you do it, versus a new material that did not evolve in the same tradition, it is easy to explain reviews of some swordsmiths that say, I made the sword from Western steel, it is inferior to the native. There's a lot of nationalism in that statement, and there might be some ring of truth, specifically because the steels they're working with did not develop within this specific tradition. It also explains several features. You see, Japanese steel co-evolved with Japanese sword making, and in the sense that what makes a beautiful sword informs what is the best steel smelting process. And what is the best steel smelting process informs what's a beautiful sword. When a new steel comes in, it might not have the same features that a Japanese steel-made sword will have. The hada will be not as pronounced. For example, the differential heat treating would take differently. The habuchi line would not be that bright. All kinds of new things come into the equation. And it is really, really fun to think of a smith in period experimenting with this very expensive exotic material and trying out new things. In fact, there was one specific school in Japan who seemed to have not informed their clients that they were making katanas from Western steel, and that school is famous for a super refined hada. Now, it could be the case that they did not inform people around them to keep it as a secret. It could be out of a certain degree of embarrassment, or it could be status. I make this type of sword, none of you make it, my secret is mine, and you all suck. It could be a degree of that school pride. Okay, so here we have a katana made by Hizen Smith, and it has a super, super fine hada, which is difficult to detect. Now, I am not certain whether this is a Nambantetsu blade or not, because this school is infamous for not informing the client what the steel is made out of. However, this is the school that's famous for that. This blade has all the features that are uncharacteristic of a Tamahagani katana. However, they're not uncharacteristic enough to conclusively say one way or another, and I'm certainly not going to perform any chemical tests on a work of art. However, the cool thing is, in our YouTube comments, people say, could you make a katana out of Wootz? I would not want to, because a straight up Wootz puck, if you differentially heat treating it, has too much tension between the edge and the spine and is more likely to crack than a non-Wootz puck. Now, we don't know if this particular sword is Wootz steel, because the way the Japanese processed Western steel, their own steel, was within a specific tradition and broken down into specific schools, specific teachers, specific periods. So the process of cutting, stacking, folding, stacking, cutting is the exact process that eliminates all the nice Wootz pattern that you see in Middle Eastern blades. However, this specific school is well known for sneaking in Nanban Tetsu into their katanas and then parading around in front of other schools that our pattern is a little bit finer or much finer than yours, and you can't figure out how to achieve it. Out of the types of ingots imported into Japan from the West, the Hyotan style ingot seems to contain the most amount of phosphorus and the most amount of sulfur, and also is very high carbon, about 1.3% on average, ranging from 1.44 to 0.93%. That is very high carbon steel. And the phosphor and sulfur, once again, is super consistent with the evidence of statistically representative samples from Middle Eastern blades. In fact, the complaint of extant Japanese smiths that Namban Tetsu is too brittle and unworkable is consistent with the complaints Middle Easterners had when they encountered Crusaders. The only source that compares Western bloomery steel swords to Middle Eastern swords is that those northern barbarians have better swords than we do. They don't break as easy. So once again, even in circumstantial evidence, there's enough there to conclude that some Wootz ended up in the hands of some Japanese smiths, and it was fashionable, almost a challenge, to make a good sword out of this new type material, even if the smith is bad-mouthing it. And that's not uncommon because I bad-mouth Wootz all the time when I'm working on it, sometimes even in front of the camera. Wootz is a difficult material to work with and is very idiosyncratic in the way you process it. So what you're supposed to do is start forging your Wootz puck at a relatively low heat until the carbidic lattice starts breaking apart and the puck starts moving more like normal steel. And that's exactly what I did for this katana. I started forging it out pucks, and as soon as they start moving, I just made bars and stacked them the way I would normal Damascus. Remember, I didn't have the goal of achieving a Wootz pattern in a katana. That is not what Japanese smiths did, and that's not what I'm going to do. So what I need to do is kind of give everybody a taste of what a Namban Tetsu katana would have been made like or would have looked like. So again, this topic is not very well researched in the West, in the English-speaking world. It is quite researched in Japan and is its own topic of discussion. However, it is incredibly cool to look at a culture that I personally hold as a control group for sword making, because the tradition of sword making has not been broken for 1,000 years, and use it as a comparison to what we know about Western or Middle Eastern swords everywhere else. So it's incredibly, incredibly awesome to actually stumble on these Nambantetsu blades and read up on them and read up on the reviews, because think about it. A Japanese smith encountering new material is just like you encountering your first Wootz puck and being frustrated when you overheated it slightly, it cracked, or you hit it too hard, it did something wrong. Again, you have extant sources of the same research frustration about a new material as we do now. Here is a cross-section of a actual crucible steel puck. This one was done using a direct ore reduction. And you can see it's pretty solid. Normally you have some bubbles in it, but grind them out and you can start forging it. So House of Atlas approached us and said, hey, we have razor blades. Can you make a katana out of them? Well, the way that got me thinking is I can't exactly make tamahagani out of razor blades. They are a modern alloy and they're kind of a pain that probably won't forge well. So immediately I thought, there's this one thing that very few people talk about, but when they do talk about it, they talk about it passionately, and that's Namban Tetsu. That got me thinking about a crucible steel puck. How do I melt the razor blades? In the video we show the commercial level putting in the razor blades with the plastic. We didn't do it like that. What we did, we took out the steel, put it in the crucible, mixed in a little bit of iron in there just to help with the forge welding down the line and to dilute some of the chrome alloys just a tiny bit. Add a little bit of vanadium containing steel just to keep the mixture really nice, because you want vanadium to reduce grain growth in your final product. So we made our own homebrew based on the razor blades. Then after the puck was cooked, we made several pucks and then we started stacking them. In the stacking process, I added a little bit of known steel into the mixture. Once again, from what we know about Nambantetsu, they were working with multiple types of Western steel, where the Nitoho type ingot was very good, apparently, for swords. So You, the viewer, can pretend that I mixed the difficult to work with ingot with the easy to work with ingot to produce the final outcome. The process was in no lesser way frustrating and difficult, and there's a lot of responsibility making something from unknown material, especially if that unknown material was cooked by me, but in the end, we got ourselves a katana. Some of the features of the home-cooked steel katana, once again, the hamon line, actually the border between the heat-treated steel and not heat-treated steel, at the border of the hamon line was not as bright and well-defined as with a traditional steel, but that's not a big deal. That was to be expected. Another thing is the steel didn't like to forge weld as well as a traditional steel. Once again, that is only to be expected if one of your starting points is modern razor blades. So here's the House of Atlas katana. It was themed based on the design of the razors, so the Minuki are mammoth ivory and horn version of these razors. As you can see in the habaki, we have this little button element made out of silver, and the tsuba has the House of Atlas logo on it. And these are really nice razors and just in time for Father's Day. So thank you again, House of Atlas, for giving us the opportunity to talk about something that's really, really cool, really, really historical, and has deep roots in Japanese history, Western history, and the history of craftsmanship. It's not often that we have a sponsor that allows us to do the research to bring such a cool topic to you. And these are pretty awesome razors, so why don't you go ahead, support us by supporting them. Click the link below and get yourself one of these today for you, your dad, whoever have you.
Happy Father's Day, Dad.
This Father's Day, earn your father's respect with Atlas razors. The time has come for our world-class steel razors to be reborn. Reforged for your legacy. This is the Atlas Katana, the ultimate blade for the ultimate shave. Sharp enough to vanquish any villain or slice any brisket. Forged for precision, wielded with honor. Buy yours now for only $9,999.99, plus shipping and handling at houseofatlas.com. Welcome to the top. Welcome to Atlas.
Who sold this to you?
What? And of course, in this video, we barely brushed upon the topic of Nanban Tetsu. And in the future, we'd like to focus and bring to your attention other cool period materials. Wootz, whatever. And if this is something that interests you, please leave a comment below what you would like us to research and show to you next.